Hi folks, welcome to this episode of CyberTalk with Nikolay. Our topic for today is securing Active Directory. I'm super excited because we have a very special guest today who's come into LA just for this show, but I'm going to let Nikolay do the honors of the introduction for our special guest. As many of our viewers know, identity management has been at the heart of our company's genesis. It's in our DNA. So this is a topic we're very passionate about, Active Directory. And I think you're going to be extremely happy with the guest we have today. But for that, I'm going to hand over to Nikolay Chernavsky, our Chief Security Officer for ISSQUARED. Over to you, Nikolay.
Thank you, Suchinth. Once again, welcome to CyberTalk with Nikolay show. And without further ado, I'd like you to introduce to our guest speaker for today. And we're going to have answers and questions. And like Suchinth said, Active Directory is near and dear to our heart, and now we're combining secure and Active Directory, and we're going to talk a little bit deeper. So I'm going to introduce you right now to Darren Maralea. He's VP for Semperis, and he has a lot of things to say about the company, and then we're going to dive into all the questions and why we have issues with Active Directory that we shouldn't.
Thanks, Nikolay. It's good to be here. As Nikolay said, my name is Darren Maralea. I'm VP of Products at Semperis, and been working with Active Directory for a very long time, since certainly before it shipped, and really excited to talk about this latest evolution in its life.
That's fantastic. And Darren, can you tell us a little bit about Semperis? We've been very impressed by the product, and hence the invitation and our partnership. But if you could tell us a little bit about Semperis for our viewers.
Yeah, we'll do. So Semperis is a Active Directory cyber protection and recovery company. So we've essentially developed solutions to help recover Active Directory in the event of ransomware or other kinds of events that might cause Active Directory to basically go away, which is the worst case scenario for a lot of organizations. And as well have developed technology to help monitor Active Directory for security breaches, for unwanted changes. We have a sort of saying that we protect Active Directory before, during, and after the attack. So we're really around kind of a holistic approach to making sure that your Active Directory is secure 7 by 24. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
Sounds great. So now for the audience, a little bit history on Active Directory. So I'm pretty sure you're all familiar that Microsoft released Active Directory 20 plus years ago, and it's been quite successful. So we've been using it, and according to Gartner, there are 90% of companies right now, they're using Active Directory. So when I think about Active Directory and security, one thing that probably all of you familiar with, when you ask CISO or you ask anyone else in the company, where are your crown jewels? And everyone will immediately point you to in one direction. It's like either we have IP, we have manufacturing process, we have this top secret product that we're trying to develop, but more likely that no one will tell you is like Active Directory is a crown jewel. So when I looked at the space and look what is happening, one story comes to mind, and I'm going to tell you really quickly. So one time, true story, Darren, myself, and Suchinth, we were camping high in Sierras. And you know, there are a lot of black bears in Sierras and grizzlies too. So we were sitting around the campfire talking about Semperis and Active Directory and all the challenges, and all of a sudden we heard the rustle. And everyone perked up and start, what's going on? So Darren's like, all right, I think it's a bear. We need to figure it out what to do. So Darren climbed up the tree. Suchinth's like, okay, I think it's a bad idea. I'm not going on a tree. So he grabbed big stick. It's like, I'm going to face the bear. I think I'm going to take him down. So I kind of look at them. It's like, okay, that's not a bad idea, but I'm going to tie my shoes. I'm going to stretch a little bit, and I'm going to run as fast as I can, because I certainly can outrun Suchinth, and Darren is up on the tree, so I think I'll be good. So in a way, this story tells us like the same thing about Active Directory security. So we spend a lot of times doing certain things, and right now we're trying to outrun the bear that is actually hunting down Active Directory. And the story hold the water, because if you look right now at what is going on with SolarWinds incident or accident that happened, or cybersecurity breach, so that's what's actually at the core of it. So golden ticket was compromised, and threat actors were able to bypass all 2FAs that company had and got into the companies, get the data, so they get to their crown jewels. So, and I think that's one of the challenges that people start to realize, and Cybersecurity comes in the right time. Why people need to pay attention right now to Active Directory and spend a little bit more time. So I think transitioning out of this story into the challenges, so I'd like to ask this question of Darren, is like, what do you think the challenges besides outrunning the bears? Like, why nobody was really paying a whole lot of attention to it?
It's a good story, especially since I'm a terrible climber, so I don't think probably
Hey,
you get very
2
far up
wins.
the tree.
I certainly wouldn't make it out.
Yeah. So I think that the challenge really is that, and you mentioned it, Active Directory's been around for 21 years now, and it's for, let's say, 15 years of that life, it was the sleepy backwater of infrastructure in most organizations. Critical, right? You come into work, you log into your Windows system, you're logging into Active Directory. Critical infrastructure, but never really thought of as a security risk. And about 5 or 6 years ago, that started to change. And I think most organizations today that we encounter still run Active Directory as if it were that sleepy backwater. And it's absolutely not. It's really, there are so many attack paths. Every month there's a new attack path. Not necessarily vulnerabilities, code vulnerabilities in Windows or Active Directory, but just technologies like NTLM and Kerberos and SMB and all these related old technologies that attackers are just finding new and creative ways of getting after. And that's just made Active Directory, unfortunately, a big target. And because it's a big target and because it is the foundation for identity in most organizations, the consequences are really bad. And that's, I think, why we've started to see people becoming aware of that threat and that risk and needing to do something about it.
Yeah, it's definitely can be related to, and according to some research, 42% of all cyber breaches that happened in the past 2 years were attributable to Active Directory compromise.
Yeah, I believe it.
So it sounds like we're approaching on something that we need to take care of this bear situation.
Yeah, for sure.
So
it's not just one bear, actually. That's the problem. There's like 20 bears knocking at your door.
Yes, that's true. And actually, those bears quite sophisticated, and they continue to mutate. So, like people used to say, they're a lot smarter than average bear out there. Darren, based on what we just described and the challenges that we have in Active Directory, and I can relate to most of them, and according to recent data, that 42% of all the breaches happened in the past 2 years just because of Active Directory compromises.
Right.
So a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to do other things. But what is so unique about Active Directory, in your opinion, that people are overlooking or neglecting to see that they need to actually boost or improve and make it a little bit better, so all those average bears out there won't be able to get them?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the challenges with Active Directory is that even though it's reliable and pretty much runs all the time, it is and can be very complex to manage. The security model, the delegation model in Active Directory is a very complex, and if you're not experienced and understanding of it, and especially over, organizations have had it for years, they have multiple admins managing it, and essentially you've got a hodgepodge of security, so that you end up with this kind of complex mess of securing Active Directory. There's that, and then all these protocols that are supported by Kerberos NTLM, each with its own configuration oddities, behavioral oddities, that all lead to eventually some kind of security access for the bad guy. And that's, I think that complexity has bred a lot of the problems that we have. That sort of, it's not secure by default. You have to work at it, and most organizations don't take that time to work at it.
So Dan, I want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier about Active Directory or AD being that sleepy backwater foundation. In ISSQUARED's experience, we found that too. Now, we work with several customers who obviously are very aware of Active Directory, but by and large, what we find, you absolutely nailed it. It's a sleepy backwater, it's foundational, it works, a lot of, frankly, executive management and the business is focused on the fancy front-end tools.
Right.
So an Active Directory consolidation domain project is not very glamorous.
Right.
And what we found is that in spite of Active Directory being so foundational, the talent pool around true high-end architects who truly understand Active Directory is very limited. And every company, large organizations, typically have a couple of folks, but it's not massive.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's even challenging to, kind of convey the fact that security is so fundamental. So how is Semperis going about kind of educating this aspect of it? Because again, for us, Active Directory is a passion. We have some of the thought leaders in the industry who work for our company, but you are spot on. So how is Semperis attacking this problem?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and I think education is a really big part of it. I think what we've tried to do is educate customers as much as possible. We also have a great group of, I was an Active Directory and group policy MVP through the Microsoft MVP program. We have 4 or 5 of some of the smartest AD MVPs working in our organization. And we've tried to use that knowledge and our knowledge of Active Directory to to help educate customers. We also came out about a year or so ago with a free tool called Purple Night. And if you go to purple-night.com, you can download it. And it has something like nearly 100 different security indicators that can run against your Active Directory and assess your security posture. And it even gives you a letter grade, A, B, C, or D. And so, customers run that and they're always surprised at what it finds and the different holes that they have within their Active Directory environment. And it's an educational process as part of that.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned Purple Night. I know last year when we kind of ran a campaign around Purple Night, we were encouraging customers to look at it, very successful. And I'd encourage viewers to take a look at Purple Night with Semperis. Really easy to use. And obviously, it needs to be done by the right folks, the AD architects or the security team. But we found that very, very helpful. We had a lot of inquiries from customers. Hey, why is my grade showing like this? I thought we were higher up, and you have kind of those awkward discussions, but really positive, constructive at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think thank you guys for that input. So part of it, if I'm looking at the problem from cybersecurity perspective, cybersecurity professionals look at Active Directory as a commodity. So they don't look at something that they need to protect. And it's like, okay, it's being used in identity and access management space, great. Do you have backup? Do you have continuity recovery, something else? So I'm not really worried about other things. I know that when threat actors is going to get into the space, the first things they do, they're going to run minikets or something like that to steal all the hashes, and then they're going to try to run the hashes. So it's kind of inevitable. But nobody really challenged the industry, and nobody really come forward to say why we keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. Like, we've done really great around endpoints, and I would say the same thing about endpoints. We were doing poorly and reselling the same product for X number of years until somebody scratched back of their head and said, well, I think we should stop running away from the bear and invent something different and completely different product. So that's where you see disruptors came in. So I'm kind of thinking the same way, that where all these security professionals need to align a little bit closer with IT and see the problem in the front, rather than try to say, it's not my problem, let somebody else handle it. Yeah. So with that said, it leads up me to next question. It's like, why there were no disruptors in that space? And what your CEO was thinking when came up with a product, and we already talked about all the challenges and everything that was going on, but again, at the same time, you have plenty of challenges and nobody wants to pick it up and say, I want to solve it.
Right.
So how did it come about, and what happened there, and do you have any information to share with us?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think, for us, it was somewhat fortuitous. So a couple of our founders had worked at Microsoft and had gone through the process, and the fairly painful process of having to work with their customers to recover Active Directory from a disaster. And this was back before, ransomware events, ransomware-driven events were the predominant failure point for Active Directory. But he noted at the time that the process that Microsoft had documented for recovering Active Directory was painful, very manual. And indeed, we saw that with when ransomware started to take off, we saw these high-profile events like NotPetya and its impact on the shipping company Maersk, where it took them days to recover their Active Directory. So we thought at the time there was a better way for doing Active Directory recovery, and came up with an automated process for doing that, for taking all those complex manual tasks that Microsoft had called for recovering an AD, and automating those end to end. And it just so happened that as we were building this solution, as it got to the market, this whole ransomware driven disaster scenario took off, and customers rightly were looking around and saying, if Active Directory gets ransomware, how the heck are we going to get back in anything short of a business killing duration of time? And so they came to us looking for a solution. I think why folks hadn't picked up on the Active Directory market in the vendor space. I mean, I think it relates to the fact that Active Directory has been around for a while. It's considered legacy by most vendors, and that wasn't interesting. It didn't have some kind of sexy cloud story around it, or a hybrid story, and it was really ignored. But I think what we saw was that there was this huge problem brewing, and we really needed to get on top of it and help customers get on top of it.
Got it. And I think you said something that people don't consider, and especially in security, when they say it's IT's problem to recover directories. Like, I've been on incidents, and when it gets hit, it's again, it's IT problem. It's like, you guys hurry up and get it back up and running. But what I also noticed, that people don't have that many skills how to set up second directory, Active Directory, and make sure that there's continuity when incident happen, how soon, because usually Active Directory is the only thing you have.
Right.
So you don't have anywhere in a test environment or in a staging environment exactly the same replica, because it's extremely difficult to build. And I think what you touched upon is extremely important to understand for cybersecurity and IT, that you have potential to do certain things better and much faster using products like yours. And I think, Suchinth, from your perspective, you've been through quite few upgrades of Active Directory, and could you just share a little bit how are they going, and how smooth all those operations are, and how long does it take?
No, absolutely.
How many times?
Absolutely no. So that's a loaded question, but I'm going to try to answer it as objectively as I can. And I have strong views on it. I'm even maybe to some extent biased on my answer here, but what I've seen is, I think Darren and Nikolay, both of you touched upon some very critical points. I would go so far as to say, and again, I'm not trying to critique, it's just an observation, there's no right or wrong. In many companies, I've seen that Active Directory does not even sit in security.
Yeah,
so
very true.
Now, nothing wrong with that. So what happens is, in bare metal or whatever, the infrastructure is handled by infrastructure, and there's identity management.
Right.
I've seen several organizations where identity management sits under infrastructure and may not be under the CISO, and that's totally fine. Some of this is organic, it's based on mergers, acquisitions, but what happens is that, like, I think Nikolay hit on a great point, is when we're doing, ISSQUARED does a lot of these projects, domain consolidation. It's a very interesting mix, because you could be with some very progressive organizations when it comes to security, but the back-end foundational, you're having discussions about, servers, and it's not really a security discussion. There's the teams are disparate, and like I said, while there's a lot of people who understand operationally, I think the true architects who understand how to do a domain consolidation or an upgrade to set up the organization for the future, to plug in with all these other front-end tools, like you said, some really very cool, glamorous SaaS tools. And a lot of people view AD as kind of a back-end. So Nikolay, to attack your question, these AD projects at the back-end are very grueling. They're very unglamorous. Nobody wants to be involved in them. And frankly, you get in the news if something goes wrong. But if it goes right, quite frankly, I've had management teams that think of this as like an upgrade of a server. So what's the big deal? Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but point being that I think for a long time, Active Directory was in this gray space of, is it infrastructure? and very often got lumped in with Windows Server administration, right? It's very normal to find a company, and there's nothing wrong with that, where Windows Server admins also are the domain admins for AD. There's an IAM team, and there's a security team.
Right.
And there's this whole thing going on. But I think what's happened is, I think over the last few years with all the different cyber attacks, there's a new awareness around Active Directory. I think still that awareness on Active Directory, that while it's legacy, it's not glamorous, it still is the foundation for a lot of things that you can do on the front end. So I think to answer your question, Nikolay, it's tough, but I think I've seen a lot of organizations struggle through AD projects. They typically don't go that well. Sometimes there's outages. So what we do is we work very closely with clients, and I think clients have become a lot more aware of the need to not impact end users, the criticality of this, and to not treat AD as like a Windows Server upgrade. So that I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think it's interesting when you talk about the where AD sits in most organizations. I think we've actually started to see a change in who we talk to about Active Directory, more towards the CISO organization. And I think that's, as you said, I think it's a great thing, because I think you really do need to think about Active Directory as a core part of your security story. I think there was somebody at Microsoft that called identity the control plane for most organizations, and I really think that's true. It's without that identity control plane being pristine and protected, everything else in the organization falls. So I think it's the smart thing to do is think about AD that way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely, and somewhat what you Darren said, and I think where AD sits, it's always hot potato.
Yeah.
And the reason, because what Suchinth mentioned, nobody wants to deal with backup recovery and all this stuff, and then from information security point of view, nobody wants to deal with auditors, because most auditor right now is geared towards access management.
Right.
And that's a whole lot of paperwork that you have to go every time, every quarter, and that's
Right.
like Active Directory. No. You keep it.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point around backup and recovery, because in a lot of organizations, they have some team that handles backup and recovery for them generically. They have the backup products, used to be tape, and now it's more sophisticated, but they think, oh, I'm covered because I have my backups of Active Directory. They really don't realize is that, yeah, you have a backup, but try actually executing on that if you have a failure of the entire Active Directory forest.
Well, and probably if you
Most
have backup
vendors.
of a few millions of objects,
Exactly.
how soon are you going to be back?
Yeah, and I would say that most backup vendors, we have this conversation a lot, where most backup vendors are not in the business of understanding Active Directory forest recovery. In fact, all of them.
Absolutely. And if I can add, right, so AD recovery is not like, there's an app that went down, there's an outage
Right.
for 4 hours, and maybe it's as bad as you got to get tapes, back in the day flown in. There's a lot more to it. And the challenge with AD is, like Nikolay alluded to, right, there's production.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to mimic a dev and test just because of the way AD is architected. And so there's not a lot of opportunity to test business continuity with AD.
Right.
And
It's very true.
Yes. So I think that's where I think a tool like Semperis has tremendous value.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of, we have the facility to be able to take your production AD and essentially replicate it in an isolated environment for doing DR testing.
Correct.
And that's very popular, because for the exact reason you mentioned, that's not something you want to practice in production.
Correct.
Not at all.
Absolutely. So Darren, do you have any examples of so again, unfortunately, just like security for AD and AD recovery, sometimes organizations need a wake-up call. Unfortunately, that's kind of what happened with the NotPetya and several other things. Resiliency is a big thing now with the hurricanes we had a couple of years ago. NotPetya, I think, raised a lot of awareness. We're seeing a lot of geopolitical issues right now. What are the kind of, without maybe going into confidential details on specific clients or names, any particular use cases where you proactively, either preemptively or come in after the fact and recovered? What is the recovery time? If you could give us some just sense without going into any confidential details.
Yeah, I think we do get involved in incidents, unfortunately, usually after they've happened, but often, we try to prevent incidents, and most of the incidents that we get involved in aren't using our products at the time. They are after, but they aren't at the time. So we do get involved, and what I'll say, kind of characterizing them generally, is that the attacks that we see happening are not as sophisticated as you might imagine. So it's really basic stuff that continues to get exploited. I mean, attackers are, I won't call them lazy, but they know what works and what doesn't, and they choose the path of least resistance. There's plenty of tooling out there for doing, as you were mentioning earlier, Nikolay, credential theft on a workstation and using that to move laterally and escalate privilege to get to domain admin. And so what we've seen with a lot of the incidents that we've dealt with is that kind of activity. So we see backdoors and persistence show up in Active Directory, and we have a version of Purple Knight that we developed for post-compromise that can look for those evidence of persistence. And we see it. We're in an engagement where we were watching the attacker put a user into domain admins, have our solution yank it out automatically, put the user back in, have our solution yank it out, and this is like, repeatedly happening. So, I think that the challenge, of course, is, oftentimes these attacks start elsewhere. So they'll start at an endpoint somewhere, and they move all around the organization. And getting them out of the organization while you're trying to recover Active Directory can be a challenge. We had one recently where what we ended up doing is taking a backup of their Active Directory as they were attacked, recovering it using our recovery solution into an isolated environment, then using our assessment tools to find all of the backdoors and persistence that the attacker had placed into Active Directory. Of course, an attacker wants to make sure they're going to stay there, so they'll create backdoor accounts, they'll create all sorts of sort of stealth ways of privilege escalation, like using SID history injection or things like that. And then essentially, if they were to get booted out and they make their way back in, then they can use those accounts again. So what basically we did is we took this AD offline, we cleaned it up, we made sure that there wasn't any of that persistence in the environment. We recovered it using our recovery solution, and then we waited for the rest of the network to get cleaned to make sure that the attacker was no longer in, and then reintroduced Active Directory into the environment. So they were able to, really not suffer any significant downtime at all. It depends on the size of the Active Directory, but we have been able to recover amazingly large Active Directories in, with distributed resources. You can imagine the largest AD users have domain controllers all over the world. We've been able to recover those environments in a matter of hours rather than, for sure, not days or weeks. And even in some decent sized environments, we can recover in less than an hour, which is phenomenal when you consider that that destruction of Active Directory is a major impacting event. Actually, one interesting point here is that people don't realize how much of their management infrastructure is dependent on AD. They have privileged access management solutions, network devices where they're authenticating the Active Directory to be able to get into those devices. Well, if AD is down, you better have a break glass account that you can use to get in. Otherwise, everything is down.
Group policy, everything is
group policy.
System center, everything is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's you don't appreciate how much is dependent on it. The virtualization infrastructure that you're using to recover to. It's like you better have some backup accounts there.
Yeah, Darren, I think you also mentioned right now something important, that from cybersecurity perspective, when we go through the incidents, in many cases, like when you mentioned somebody created accounts, embarrassed took it out, and then they put it back in. So without solutions like that, in, let's say, we're not going to say all days, for the most companies where they're not protecting Active Directory, it's extremely challenging thing to do, because in all the solutions that exist today, they're not going to catch all those changes, or by the time they catch changes, it's going to be too late. And bringing up our earlier conversations about crown jewels, if somebody wants to get access to crown jewels, all they need to have valid credentials. So they can either use the hashes to get in,
right,
or they can get access to Active Directory, create super user account. Now I have access to all the kingdom. I can go everywhere else. Don't need to take any doors down, don't need to break any locks, and pretty much authorized everywhere. And it's extremely hard to identify this lateral movement, which could be a conversation for a later day. But in this case, it's like when you look at the incidents, things that happened before incidents, during incidents, and after. And I think those are the challenges that I personally, when I investigated incidents, it's hard to stitch pieces together.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're trying to make a story. It's like, well, how did this account came from this end to this end?
Right.
What happened in the middle? And you start going back to logs, and there are no logs.
Yeah.
So you kind of guess that something happened, some magic happened, and whatever it is, right now we have a problem over here, we need
That's
to
right.
deal it, we'll take care of the problem, and hopefully it doesn't resurrect itself, and then lo and behold, you close the problem, and all of a sudden the same problem resurfaces. Like, what happened? So I think if you can, from security perspective, if we look at all the stages, they're extremely important in addressing cyber incidents. So how does your product kind of goes about, and what unique you guys created that can assist cybersecurity professionals in protecting Active Directory? I would call it almost real time.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think this is why, I mentioned at the beginning that we have this sort of slogan of before, during, and after the attack. And what we try to do is, we have, with our DSP product, we have this sort of continuous assessment of your security posture within Active Directory. So we're doing research, the community does research, we're finding attack paths all the time with respect to AD, where we want to be able to show you where you might have a potential attack path, whether it's something like zero logon, where basically Microsoft had a vulnerability, they patched the vulnerability, surprisingly few people patched right away. I'm kidding, right? But so we came out with a zero logon vulnerability detection within our DSP product within days of that vulnerability showing up. Petit patam, NTLM relay attacks. What our job is to give you the visibility before the attack happens as to where those weaknesses are. When you're in the midst of an attack, or when you're just managing Active Directory day to day, we're monitoring all the changes that are happening in Active Directory. So the sort of during the attack phase is that monitoring. We do that in a unique way. We're not relying on security event logs. We're actually using the same replication APIs that AD uses to replicate domain controllers. So we see changes even if the attacker has managed to bypass the security event logs, which is valuable. And then we can act on those changes. So if we see patterns of bad behavior, we can have rules that auto-undo changes of Active Directory, privileged accounts or other operations that get performed within AD, and then alert you about those so you know that they're happening. So we've tried to give you the tools to protect your environment up front, but then also to be able to detect attacks in progress while they're happening, and potentially auto-remediate those so that you're not waiting for a SOC analyst to pick it apart and say, okay, we need to do something about this. But also providing that forensic information to know what has changed, what has happened within the AD. And then, of course, if all things fail, and we know that there are some attacks that are new or sophisticated, then we can get you back up and running as quickly as possible. So, I think we continue to invest in the research around the new attacks to be detected, as well as attacks in progress. And I think what you'll see from us over time is that getting more and more sophisticated.
Got it. No, thanks for so one thing that I want to bring up before the close, it's when we start this conversation with bears, woods, and campfires and everything else, and you talked a little bit about complexity of Active Directory. Now, going through all this conversation that we had about different stages and this and that, and so how would you say right now if somebody, because again, every product, everyone says it's like, yeah, I can do everything else and better than anyone else out there, knowing that there are hardly any product in this particular space that actually do what you described. And from my perspective, trying to protect all those crown jewels, I'm looking, it's like, okay, that's a great thing that just happened. How, in your experience, let's say, does somebody deploy this product? Do they need to grow another sort of lob to make sure that it works right, and you have to hire a bunch of people to manage, because that's typical thing when somebody says, yes, it's everything great. Just like we've seen over the years, and there are great videos of showing how somebody does the demo, and then when it comes to production, the whole thing falls apart, and you need to have an army of people to support. So in your case, it's like maybe anecdotal or real cases where you can say, yes, we deployed it, and 5 minutes later, everyone was up and running. It's like,
Yeah.
How would you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, every environment's certainly different, and we have literally some of the largest Active Directories on the planet. So, it depends on the complexity of your environment. But what we've tried to do with the products is to make them as easy as possible to get up and running and use. So we have people that have installed our products in a couple of hours and are backing up their Active Directory in that much time, or monitoring their Active Directory in that much time. And it really is about giving you, and this is why with the security assessment tools that we provide, where we give a letter grade, it's about making it so that you don't have to be a security expert or an Active Directory expert to get insights into your Active Directory security posture and be able to protect AD. So we try to make as much of that automatic as possible. But yeah, I mean, the products are simple to install. They're web-based, so it's not like you have to install a console on everyone's workstation that needs to use it. So it's kind of a modern approach to delivering this kind of functionality. But the key really is giving you as much information as quickly as possible, and I think we do a pretty good job of that. I mean, I spent my first 20 some odd years in IT working with vendor products, and there were some 3-letter named vendors that you can imagine did not make it easy to install or operate those products.
Got it.
It's been nice to be in a different world.
Now it sounds like a great solution, and I think I want to bridge a little bit of a conversation between business, what you, Suchinth, were talking about, operational resiliency on Active Directory and upgrades and all these things. Let's say all those challenges, are they going to remain, or if somebody wants to go through upgrade, what would be right now situation if upgrade fails? Who's going to take the hit? How long is it going to be before they come back? Versus if you have something, and maybe Darren can chime in on this one, when you have the product that actually can help you with achieving better operational resilience.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to step back a little from this, right? So typically in our AD projects now, we've been doing Active Directory for a very long time, and we take pride in it. Now we do a lot more in security outside of AD, as you know, Darren. But one of the things that we take extreme caution is that end user impact. Right. And there's CIOs and CISOs who will say very specifically, hey, you know what, I get it, we trust you, but please know that what we're doing, no news is good news. Yeah. If you're in the news, it's bad news, right? So we are very, very cautious about, there's a lot of planning that goes into these kind of cutover checklists, hypercare and all that. So my view, and after we started working with Semperis, is that if you have a tool like Semperis that's deployed and understood by the organization, and maybe somebody helping them or their internal teams, when you have a tool like that, I think it will simplify some of these projects. It's not like the cutover checklists go away and the caution goes away, but I think there's that added layer of resilience. And I personally look today, in all the discussions I've had at the executive level, cybersecurity and resilience go side by side in a technology discussion as well as a business discussion, because it's no more about, frankly, it's when we get attacked, what's the resilience? So I think there's a great story here with Semperis. And another thing that I will say is that over the last 20 years, there's very few, Darren touched about this, there's very few products that have come out in this space that are path-breaking or disruptors. And one of the reasons that really attracted us to working with you guys in Semperis was that we finally saw a product that's actually doing something very differently. Right. Because for a company like ours, which is so deeply rooted in IAM and AD, to say, hey, we want to work with somebody else, this was something truly disruptive. And I was very impressed by a conversation we had with your CEO, Mickey, a few months ago. And this is a bit of a digression, but if you could talk to our viewers, Darren, I was really impressed on the way, without giving out trade secrets, the way Semperis is structured is you have a product team and then you have a scientific team.
Yes.
That both report into your CEO.
Right.
And I'm sure there's other companies that do that, but by and large, typically product management holds that, and DevOps, dev. So I was very impressed by this, your focus on research and keeping that separate from product development.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit of that, as much as you can share?
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, I think it's, you sort of alluded to it, that you the business of building products is a fairly well-established business, and you I won't say you're on a treadmill, but you're certainly, you have a schedule that you have to adhere to, and you have features that you've promised to customers, and you have features that you've promised to your business to innovate on. But you need somebody that's dedicated to thinking outside the box, and not to say that product managers don't think outside the box, because I think they do sometimes. But having folks in research focused on not the next thing, but maybe the next thing, is really important. I think it helps us to keep our edge. It helps us to find solutions to problems that maybe we didn't even know, or customers didn't even know existed. And that team has been instrumental in coming up with some really cool ideas for us. And they still today also, with respect to Purple Knight and our DSP assessment capability, they're coming up with new security indicators, pretty much every week. So I think it's a really valuable resource for us to drive innovation into our products. And I think what you'll see from us going forward as we move into this kind of hybrid world that we're living in is more of that innovation making its way into the products. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you.
That's fantastic, guys. And I think we're coming up to the end of today's show. So as much as I would like to continue this conversation, so we wrapped up a lot of things today, and hopefully everyone in the audience learned from what we said.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to cybersecurity incidents, protecting your crown jewels. And I'd like you to think about Active Directory is your crown jewel. If you can't really protect Active Directory, all other things that you have in your environment can be owned and can be attacked and can be accessed by way of accessing Active Directory and creating accounts or doing all other weird stuff that all those bears, yes, they come up with and they try to get into our environment. So definitely thank you for that. Again, Darren, thank you for coming out and being on the show today. And thank you, Suchinth, for sharing your operational responsibilities.
Absolutely. And I think I always learn, I'd say, when I speak with Nikolay, and I think Darren joins that group. I think before the show we had some really interesting conversation on Active Directory, which, like we said, we don't have a lot of such discussions. But before we wrap up for our viewers, I do want to extend a special thank you to Semperis for being a great partner, and Darren, for yourself for coming down on a Friday to our studios here in Los Angeles.
No, happy to be here.
I think just the way the conversation's gone, and I would love to invite you back in the next few weeks or months, so I hope you will accept that.
Definitely, yeah.
Absolutely.
That would be great.
And just to wrap up, I think if you have questions for Nikolay or for any of the guests over here, we have an email ID, cybertalk@ISSQUAREDinc.com. Just to wrap up, it's very rare that we find a company, I know we talked about this a few times today, but I'll repeat it one last time, is that it's rare to find a company that's innovated and a disruptor in the Active Directory space. Our own company, ISSQUARED, being so deep in IAM, we feel very lucky and privileged to have partnered with Semperis, and I would strongly recommend all of you to take a look. For our viewers, if you're interested, take a look at the Semperis website, take a look at their Purple Knight program. It's a very, very easy concept to understand. I think those of you who understand Active Directory will really relate to this matter. But once again, this is super excited to have Darren in the studios today. Nikolay, thank you. I've realized that Nikolay has a lot of stories to share, so I'm looking forward to future episodes. And Darren, we will definitely have you back. And thanks to all our viewers, and have a great weekend.
And remember, we are stronger together.